Meghann Ackerman. I'm a social media and community engagement specialist with the City of Somerville's Communications Department. I'm here today with Ward 6 Alderman Lance Davis for Aldermen at Work. Lance Davis and his wife have lived here in Somerville since 2002 and are currently live on Highland Avenue with their 2 children. Lance was a founder and leader of Progress Together for Somerville, a group focused on boosting Somerville public schools citywide. He and his wife also serve on the honorary committee for the Somerville Homeless Coalition Gala and have been active in the Brown School PTA. In his spare time, Lance enjoys coaching both his son and daughter's youth soccer teams. Lance earned degrees from the Newhouse School at Syracuse University and Boston College Law School. He currently works as an attorney specializing in negotiating complex consulting, software licenses, and cloud service agreements. Welcome to Aldermen at Work, Alderman Davis.
Thank you very much.
So you should mention you are newly elected to the position.
Yes, indeed. Just a little over a month into my my first term here.
Yeah. So how is being an alderman so far? Is it kind of what you expected, or are you finding some surprises along the way?
I'd say it's primarily what I expected. I knew it would be incredibly exciting, and I also knew it would be a lot of work, and that both have proven to be true. You know, the great thing about the campaign was getting to hear from so many people, knocking on doors just about every day from May through early November, and it was great because we have a really incredibly engaged community, and people really understand the issues more than you would expect. People can. There's not just one issue that they can talk about, with a high level of intelligence and information and understanding. So that made it a lot of fun, and that has now translated into, as now that I've taken office, we're actually dealing with issues, and we're taking votes. I'm calling, putting things on the agenda for the Land Use Committee, of which I'm now the chair, and these are the things that I've been talking about with people since May, and so it's neat to experience how all of that process, everything that we talked about all summer long. Okay, now I actually get to do this. I get to actually push these issues forward and accomplish something, and that's been great. And those conversations with the community are still happening. And that's it. That's if there's anything that was unexpected, I think, in a positive sense, it's been that I still am engaging with people and through emails, through phone calls, and just people stopping me on the street. I knew that would happen to a degree, but I've been happy to see that the sort of the campaign style conversations, I guess, because this is my first campaign. That continues, and people really want to talk about all these things, which is great. Which is one of the things that makes this city so great, is people really care about, understand, and care about a lot of the issues that we have. So. It's been fun.
Sounds like you got kind of a really good primer on the campaign trail of the kinds of things you would be dealing with as an alderman. For sure,
yeah, for sure. In terms of the conversations and the volume, and the nice thing from a timing standpoint, you asked if it was what I expected. I guess to some extent, being asked to be the chair of the Land Use Committee, I think my sense is that probably translated into a bit more legwork, at least now in this first month, because there are a lot of important issues before that committee, and it's a great opportunity. I'm thrilled to be involved, because we have the zoning overhaul, which is something that we talked about a lot at the doors, and there's also the 20% inclusionary, citywide inclusionary citizen amendment that's been proposed, which also is in the zoning overhaul, but we may do that earlier, and so that's another thing we have to deal with. And so scheduling those meetings and that sort of thing, that's taken a lot of time, but it's also, that has been where I've really seen on the ground, like, okay, we're now accomplishing the things, or we have an opportunity to accomplish the things that I've been talking about. So that part of it has been really great.
So you mentioned this was your first time running for office. Yeah. So why did you decide to run for alderman and get involved?
Well, I've always appreciated Rebecca Goretz and the job that she did for Ward 6. I think she was a fantastic representative. I had met her, actually. I was working on another campaign in the same year that she then eventually ran, and and helped on her campaign a bit when she did first run. So I've known her since that time, and you know, we've had a lot of back and forth about various things. And I always thought she did, you know, she really represented the values that are important to me, and that, you know, on which she ran very well. And it's really important to me that someone, you know, continued that when I found out she wasn't going to seek re-election. That, you know, this is really important, and through, you know, several conversations, it seemed like, you know, there would be an opportunity there, and you know, we love it here. My wife and I, you know, we're raising our family with 2 kids in the Brown School, as you mentioned, and it's really important. There are big decisions that we're making right now as a city, and these things are going to affect the city not only for the rest of my children's time here in the schools and as they're growing up, but hopefully, if they don't move too far from home, you know, the city that they'll inherit from us, and I want to make sure that we get those things right, and that we make decisions that reflect, you know, my values as a progressive and the values of the community. It was important enough to me that I didn't hesitate for a moment to say, all right, let's go.
So Ward 6, which you represent, a large chunk of that is Davis Square, where there's no shortage of things going on,
Sure.
as well as, you know, the surrounding neighborhoods, which are very vibrant, as you mentioned, have really engaged, active residents. So what are some of the neighborhood issues, you know, you've been hearing from your constituents, or, you know, you've recognized that you want to bring up on the board?
Well, you know, the biggest thing that we talked about, both in the campaign trail and frankly that we've been talking about for, you know, for some time, even before I even thought about ever running for anything, is the issue of the changing community, and the way that, you know, it's getting more and more expensive to live here in this city, which is the price of success in a lot of ways. It's a fabulous place to live, and we're working to make it a you know, a better place every day. But the flip side of that is people want to live here, it gets really expensive to live here. And one of the main reasons why Amy and I love it here and want to raise our family here is that there are so many different people from every different background, and every way you slice, you know, diversity. It's great, and that's what we want our kids to grow up and see, and that's changing. And so that, you know, that is the issue, I think, you know, citywide, and certainly in Ward 6 that I heard about the most. And people recognize that you know, the diversity that we have in the city is a real value. You know, it's one of the reasons why people want to live here. And you know, unfortunately, the flip side of that is that the more that happens, the harder it is for, you know, a lot of those diverse communities to stay here. And that includes socioeconomic diversity and, you know, racial, ethnical, any way you slice it. So, you know, that's the thing that I think is probably at the top of everybody's mind, because so many of the other, you know, on the ground type issues, you know, the zoning changes, you know, the Green Line coming in, hopefully, the Union Square redevelopment, anything that happens in Davis Square around, that all ultimately impacts the affordability in the city, right? So that issue sort of, you know, it underlies everything. You know, on a more sort of day-to-day level, you know, things like traffic and parking during snow emergencies. You hear a lot of that, and that's great. Like, that's the kind of thing that you know, it's a lot easier to address some of those issues quickly. You know, we need a pedestrian crossing sign here, right? Okay, we can do that. Like, this week we can do that, right? So it's nice to have a little bit of a balance, or the long-term, big picture things. But, you know, but certainly in Davis Square, there's a lot of changes. Even, you know, Davis Square still has, you know, some of that character that it had, you know, when we moved here, going on 15 years ago, and even going back, but that continues to change. You know, the Singer sewing machine store has just left the square after a long time. Consignment Galleries just about across the street from my house has been there for most of the time that we've lived here. They're going to be moving as well. You know, a lot of little shops like that are changing, and change always happens. People care a lot about what goes into these spaces, and people care a lot about you know, what the square will look like. We saw that with the Social Security building. There were 2 proposals. This is years back, but there were 2 proposals. One was for World of Beer, which I just found out is actually going into the Cambridgeside Galleria, apparently. And the other was Boston Beer Works. And, you know, a lot of people felt like I did. Boston Beer Works is a great restaurant. If I'm going to go to the Red Sox game, I'll stop and you know, have a hamburger. But I and others felt like that wasn't the ideal situation. So, you know, we have hopefully plans there for a supermarket of some sort to be going in soon. And that, you know, those type of things, those type of decisions are that I hear a lot about that on a daily basis, because those new proposals seem to be coming up on almost daily basis, or at least a weekly basis, which is part of what makes it exciting. And it's a dynamic neighborhood to live in, but it's a challenge for all of us to the extent that we can, to the extent that it's appropriate for us as a community, to try and steer those changes. We'll try and do that without getting in the way of free market, I guess.
Sure. And you had mentioned also being on the Land Use Committee, which is taking on a lot of the big projects in Somerville, Union Square, the inclusionary zoning amendments, the big zoning overhaul. So how do you see that kind of working with some of your goals, as you mentioned, affordability and diversity? You could talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to be involved in that process, as I said, because zoning is probably the most powerful tool we have as a city, from a municipal government standpoint, to affect a lot of the things changes that we want to affect, and to I don't want to say impact, but to try and steer the development of the city, the way the city will change and evolve over the years. Zoning is a very powerful and can be a very effective tool for that. And all the zoning goes through the Land Use Committee ultimately, and then through the Board of Aldermen. So, we are fortunate to be having this conversation. We're fortunate to have a planning staff that's put an incredible amount of time into these issues. We're now, as you know, in our second round of looking at a new zoning overhaul. And the 20% citywide inclusionary proposal that was basically pushed by a group of citizens, to their credit, the argument was, we've waited long enough for this. Let's do this. We don't want to wait for the entire overhaul. And a lot of people feel that's a great idea. So it's certainly exactly the place to be to affect some of these changes. It is probably where we can have the most impact on things like affordability, and maintaining diversity and different issues, and frankly, the character of the neighborhoods, and what happens in the squares. That all goes back to zoning, because it really is the strongest tool we have. So certainly that's been my experience in my first 5 weeks or so.
So far,
that is the primary focus. The other issue I mentioned, we did actually just on Tuesday at a Land Use Committee meeting, we're discussing the new medical marijuana zoning to reflect the new state recently passed state law to allow medical marijuana facilities, looking at where those might be appropriate in the city, and I think the city's done a good job. Generally seems to be a positive reaction to the overlay map that was proposed. So hopefully we'll see that put in place pretty soon as well.
Great. And kind of as we were talking about, a lot of the neighborhoods and squares in the city are seeing some big changes, like in Union Square. A few years ago, there's a lot done in East Somerville along Broadway. And for a long time, Davis Square has kind of been, the big square of Somerville. And not to pit the squares against each other, because they're all great. But what do you see as some of the issues, specifically that may sort of affect Davis Square's future over the next couple of years, and might, kind of shape what the next generation of the square looks like? Sure.
Well, we are absolutely blessed in this city, as you noted, to have a number of really exciting, vibrant neighborhoods. It was funny when we first moved here. We had friends that lived in Davis Square previously. We were living down in what they sort of call the West End now, what's left of what used to be the West End, and so we moved here because we knew Davis Square. As you said, it was sort of the most known neighborhood in Somerville. But the same year we moved here, the Independent opened in Union Square, and so I can't remember if someone recommended, but we went down there and had a lunch or a dinner or something, kind of walked around and went, wow, this is really great, and that was it was very early in having moved here. We realized there are a lot of other great neighborhoods, and certainly those have continued to change over the years. And to the city's credit, as you mentioned, that we've put a lot of effort into improving a lot of those neighborhoods. The Broadway renovation, I guess, reconstruction in East Somerville has been, in my mind, it seems like it has been a success. we'll see where the Union Square plan goes. That's certainly a lot of work left to do there, but a lot of opportunities certainly. And to some extent, Davis has been forgotten about to some degree, and that's okay. But it is important to me, and obviously to all of us in the neighborhood, that we don't forget about the sort of commercial center in a lot of ways. There are a couple projects that are very important to me. One is the West Branch Library, which is desperate need of updates, renovation, to be made ADA compliant, which is just there's no excuse for that not having been the case at this point. So that process is in the works. We have another meeting coming up soon, and hopefully we'll see that keep moving, because it's an incredibly important resource, and with the plans that have been discussed and that are being proposed, I think it'll be a great community space, and a modern library for the 21st century, which not only will serve Davis Square and that immediate neighborhood, but it's it's the westernmost library. So all of this end of the city will benefit from that. And then the other thing that really needs to happen is some continuation of the Davis Square Streetscapes initiative. We have these lovely brick sidewalks throughout the square, which are quite charming, and many people really, really love, as do I. But actually I'm wearing a pair of shoes now that I still haven't had time to properly repair, that I destroyed on a brick that was popping up, and I'm lucky that it was just shoes, because it's hard to get through, and especially if you need mobility assistance in any way, it's dangerous. And somebody said to me, and I can't disagree, that in a lot of ways the square is not compliant, it's not accessible because of the condition of the bricks, and they're just hard to maintain. There's no fault of anybody. It's just bricks like that, especially in an environment when it's cold as it is now. They're just really hard to maintain. So there's a plan that was put together to sort of a compromise, to have a nice, clean, non-brick path for travel on the sidewalks, and then maintaining some bricks as sort of access. Looked good to me. People seem to be happy with it. But the problem, as I understand it, is that there's also a lot of issues underneath the ground. Our stormwater system citywide needs a significant overhaul, and so before we build fabulous, beautiful new sidewalks, the approach, as it was explained to us residents of Ward 6, was that they want to get that fixed first. So great, I'm fine with that, I understand it, but let's do it. We got to get moving on it. So hopefully that'll continue to, hopefully that will actually move forward as it has been explained, that'll be picked up this spring, and then move quickly from that point, because I think it's important.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw the news this week. The travel website Lonely Planet named Somerville as one of the sort of unexpected places to visit in the U.S. in 2016. So just kind of for fun, if someone was coming to Somerville, what would your itinerary for them to be if they were coming, for vacation?
You get to play travel guide.
Yeah.
Writer. Fabulous. Look, I mean, we actually have we have friends and family, obviously, that come visit all the time, and people that are coming from other areas. When I saw that article, my first joke, I just forwarded it to my wife and said, "Tell us something we didn't know," right? I mean, it was an interesting list, because I think it had Yosemite or Yellowstone in it, which doesn't seem unexpected to me.
Right.
But it also had Alaska and some other places that perhaps were unexpected.
We did beat Arkansas. So.
Yes, well, obviously. Frankly, I think we should have been higher on the list, but list makers. The great thing about Davis Square particularly is that you could spend the better part of a week in and around Davis and the immediate area and not get bored, or you can hop on the T and head into Boston and do and spend a month, right? There's no shortage of things to do. So I'll often, when people do come visit, I'll suggest, look, you gotta. It's tempting to just get on the T and go into Boston, and this is great, it's a convenient place, but don't miss the fact that you have at your doorstep incredible music venues and theater and shops and restaurants. There's obviously can't miss places if you hurry, like Johnny D's. But any number of the restaurants and various different music venues, I think, in Davis Square are fun. The Museum of Bad Art is one of my favorite unexpected things to tell people. Go see a movie and then don't miss the Museum of Bad Art, because that's a lot of fun. The Nave Gallery Annex now, next to Red Bones, is a place that people don't know about. Of course, everyone always has Red Bones on their list. I think that's been in Lonely Planet for one of those books for several years.
Yeah.
I think, deservedly so. So yeah, and then I tell them, go up to Prospect Hill Park and look at that flag and read about what happened there and the history in this city. I love when I'm walking through the streets, especially around the corner from where I live, at the corner of Willow and Elm Street. There's a marker from where there was a little skirmish on April 19th when the British troops were coming back from Concord. And it's just a random marker that usually there's someone parked in front of it, and you don't notice it. But the cool thing about this city is not only is it one of the, 15, 16 years ago, it was named one of the hippest places in America, right, by Utna Reader.
Yep.
And now here we are, Lonely Planet, naming it one of the 6 most interesting places to visit. Well, that's all true, but 200 years ago, there was a lot of interesting things happening too. So they just have this whole range of history that no matter what your interest is, there's different things you can go see and do. So it's a great place to live. Quick anecdote, a few years ago, we were looking for a vacation idea, and I sort of sat down with my wife and we talked about what would we want, looking at places maybe in Europe, and we said we'd want to, not right in the city, whatever the city would be, maybe something a little bit outside, but that you could get into the city easily, and it wouldn't be someplace where if we wanted to, we could just sort of walk into the the local neighborhood and maybe get something to eat, whether breakfast or dinner, or maybe do some shopping, or maybe go to a park. And I realized I'm describing my house.
We could just stay here.
I could just stay here and save a lot of money. But it's exactly the kind of place that you'd want to go take a vacation. So we're lucky. We're lucky to be here.
Great. And so I think you had mentioned you've been an alderman now for about a month.
Yeah.
We're going into your third meeting as a full alderman's meeting. What has that been like, kind of, sitting around the horseshoe as, an official, on a legislative body? Has that kind of felt different to you, or a departure from what you do in your day job?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It's certainly a departure from what I do in my day job, because in my day job, I usually am at my desk and communicating with people around the country or the world on email or phone, and there's much less of that human interaction. But no, it's been as expected. I mean, I think the most interesting thing, it was Tuesday night. It was my first land use committee meeting as chair. Mm-hmm. So standing up behind the podium was neat. It was quite, and with some really important things on the agenda. We were talking about the medical marijuana zoning, and we were talking about the zoning overhaul presentation that dealt with arts and the creative environment, mm-hmm. right, or creative community. Yes. So, important things that will shape the city, down the road. And so that was a fun experience. But overall, no. I mean, it's as expected. I'm comfortable in those situations, and I'm excited to be a part of that, and like I said, to not just talk about it, but actually be the one helping to do these things.
And it's totally okay to admit that you enjoy standing behind the podium. We all do it too.
It was sometimes. Well, yeah. Look, I've watched enough. I've been in enough meetings and watched enough videos of President White doing that I just followed his lead, and
yeah, definitely kind of fun to be up there, and then. So, in terms of other things going on in the city, and you're hearing from constituents, you mentioned people are really involved and active and educated. So what are some of the things you're hearing from residents on some of these big projects, mm-hmm. like Union Square, potential high school, mm-hmm. either rebuilding, renovation, right. Something in the future with that. Right. Are you finding that people have a lot of strong opinions and preferences that they're sharing, and that they?
Yeah, some people do. Everyone has a strong opinion. Just about everyone has a strong opinion about something, right? Which is great. Certainly Union Square. Depending on who you're speaking with, Union Square is a big issue, because it's a big undertaking, and the city actively decided we're going to get out in front of the inevitable development that will happen if and when a Green Line station goes in there, and I think that's commendable. But it's a big project, and it will be a big change to that neighborhood, which is already a great neighborhood, and there's a lot to be lost if hopefully only if we don't do it right. Hopefully we can still if we do it right, we can maintain the great character of that neighborhood while channeling the change that will happen in a way that reflects our community values and what we see as as a benefit for the city, for the neighborhood and the city as a whole. But people will be displaced, and a lot of what Union Square feels like now certainly will be gone, and it'll be replaced by something either better or not. So it's it's important, and people have a lot of concerns. It certainly ties into the issue of affordability, and those are without question some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in the city right now. And there's no good answer for how you avoid that. It's going to happen. So you try and do everything you can to minimize that impact, to mitigate the effects of it, to make other options available for people who ultimately are being displaced, and to try and structure that development in a way that will gain the benefits you're looking for, but without, I don't want to say unnecessarily causing displacement, but just without. You want to be very conscious and considerate of that as you're moving forward.
And I don't know if folks in your ward are kind of talking about this, or if you're kind of learning from the history of Davis Square as well, when the red line came in, if there are parallels there, or if folks are kind of sharing thoughts, on that and how they're related.
There are, to a degree. There was a public planning process that was done around Davis Square, back in that time frame, and a lot of what we see in the square now, was reflected in that. And as public planning processes go, a lot of it never happened, right? And that's fine. I do think it's important. One of the things that could also go on that list of important things to happen in Davis Square is sort of a continuation, a new revisioning of what we see for the square over the next 20 years. But Davis, it's a little different. Certainly, that visioning process was more of a vision, right, rather than an active. And with Davis, we brought the T in, and then tried to sort of piece by piece, effect a vision. In Union Square, they're taking the reins and saying, okay, we're driving this process. So it's a very different undertaking. So I think while there are some lessons to be learned, I think that I think it's on the whole it's a whole different consideration, because the volume and density and just the scale of what is being proposed in Union's doesn't compare with anything that was proposed in Davis. The interesting thing about Davis Square is a lot of people don't realize it's actually a lot less dense than it used to be. If you look at old historical pictures, a lot of those buildings were 3-4 stories that are now some of them were just 1 story or maybe 2. So there was a time when it handled a lot more density than it has now, and that's going back to the zoning and the vision, and that's a conversation we'll have to have. What might be appropriate, and does it make more sense to allow some height to bring in offices, perhaps, or does it make more sense to have residences there? I tend to think, and a lot of people tend to think, that having commercial space there will bring a little bit more life during the day, which I think would be a good thing. But those are all conversations that we need to have.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, Alderman Davis, for joining us, and be great to have you back after you've been on the board a little bit more.
Once I know what I'm doing.
Well, have experienced a little bit more of the life of an alderman, and I'm sure lots of new issues you'll have to talk about,
For sure.
and things that you're excited about working on. And thank you very much for tuning in. If you are interested in finding out more about many of the issues that Alderman Davis talked about, or getting involved, please visit the city website, somervillema.gov, where you can find more information about all these projects, as well as information about upcoming meetings and other engagement opportunities.